We've brought together a great panel, including a couple of nationally known journalists, a Major League Baseball executive, and an HBCU athletic director. They'll join us in a few moments, but we'll start with former star athletes. Each has used their notoriety during their post-athletic careers to better the community as a whole. Derrick Coleman, the All-Star, played 15 seasons in the NBA and was a two-time member of the All-NBA team. He was named Rookie of the Year in 1991. Sheryl Swoopes has the distinction of being the first player to be signed by the WNBA. During her 12-year career, she was named MVP 3 times. She was also named one of the league's top 15 players of all time, and she's a member of the Naismith Hall of Fame. And coming out of college, Eddie George was the Heisman Trophy winner in 1995. He went on to spend 9 seasons in the NFL. He was the Offensive Rookie of the Year in 95 and a 4-time Pro Bowler. In April, he was named head football coach at Tennessee State University. And I thank you all for joining us. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start with this, guys. You know, I was thinking about this, and I can say that more than any industry that I could think of, sports has allowed African Americans to play a very prominent role in what happens. Not the most prominent, but in terms of our participation, it really has been an industry that has allowed us, more opportunity than most. Derrick, let me start with you. When you look at today and the landscape of sports as relates to us, do you like what you see?
I would say yes and no. I like the opportunities that I see, with our kids and, opportunity to go to school and play, at a high level. At the pro level, I don't like what I see in basketball. To me, it's really become entertainment more than the game of basketball. I think we've really gotten away from the fundamentals of the game of basketball and just selling, for jump shots. So as I'm watching, pro basketball right now, and really it's the only time that I ever watch it, it's just like it's entertainment. It's not basketball to me anymore.
Yeah, here's what's interesting to me, Eddie, if you will. When we look at the growing social and economic power of the Black athlete, that's always been the case. I mean, I think about, Jackie Robinson certainly,
Yes.
broke the color barrier in baseball, but it was much bigger than that. Of course, there's Carlos and John Carlos and Tommy
Mhm.
Smith, 68 Olympics, the Ali Summit with Russell
Mhm.
Alcindor,
Right.
Brown and others, and what we've seen LeBron and the others, the collective do today. How do you view that marriage of athletics and social power that's given to pro athletes?
I think it's a wonderful combination. Um, it gives us a voice to talk about the things that we are passionate about. It brings light to a lot of issues that are happening in our society, specifically the African American society. Otherwise, those voices would not be heard. If LeBron didn't speak out, if Jim Brown didn't speak out, if Muhammad Ali didn't speak out, if some of the great players who were passionate about civil rights, if they did not speak out, these issues wouldn't have been heard. I think you look at this year, in light of what's happened in 2020 with the social unrest and the issues surrounding George Floyd and our athletes speaking out around that time, and COVID we're having to pause and listen and actually see it unfold before our eyes, really has made a huge difference in terms of how it is for us in these areas. And if we can use our platform of sports to bring enlightenment to that, to bring to try to equal the playing field, I have no problem with that at all.
Here's what's interesting to me, Sheryl. I think sports is reflective of the time often. In the 60s, where you had the rebellion and the Black Power movement and the like, we saw athletes really involved. Then there was kind of a lull, quite frankly, in between, and athletes were more about, I think, what they needed to do, not only on the field, but the idea of their platform wasn't the same. And now we're back into a mode where the nation is looking at things differently in the WNBA. And the ladies that play in that were very upfront with, speaking out, so upfront that they ousted an owner, which is almost unheard of. Give me a sense of how you see things.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. And I want to say what's up to Eddie in DC. It's great to see you guys. When I think about where we are right now as a people, as a country, as a nation, and I look at athletes, to DC's point, I think it's always been entertainment, right? But I think now the athletes, and I'm going to speak specifically to the WNBA players, we now have learned and we understand the power that our voices hold. And obviously, it's bigger as a collective. And when you have a group of women stand up and say, listen, what is going on to the Black community today is not right. And you had Black, white, foreigners, every woman, every person in the WNBA stood up, they stood together, they used their voice collectively. And as you said, I honestly think they played a huge role in the former owner of the Atlanta Dream no longer being an owner. And I just think we finally have gotten to a point where we look at ourselves, like LeBron says, and as women, we look at ourselves as being more than just athletes. And we understand the importance of speaking out. And when you see something that's not right, you have to stand up and you have to speak out and you have to try and make a difference. And I think that's what the women of the WNBA have always done.
I picked this spot intentionally. I've got Muhammad Ali in back of me, the painting. And, DC, one of the things that I think about is the idea of what he had to decide for his life. I mean, he gave up prime years,
Yes.
to protest the war and the like. There were complaints along the way until recently that particularly in the NBA, because of the makeup from our community, that we weren't hearing enough. Michael Jordan gets, and certainly let me say now, he has stepped up philanthropically and the like, but he is the first one to be stones thrown years ago that you're not doing enough, you're too powerful, you need to speak up. Talk to me about what you have had in terms of conversations with athletes and putting the kind of money that could be put on the line, quite frankly, if you speak up. How real is that?
Well, you got to understand this though. When you're talking about actually speaking up, with athletes, I think a guy like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar never gets his due. For him boycotting the '68 Olympics, back then protesting what was going on in America at that time, they never really give him his just due as actually really being the GOAT of the NBA period at all levels of basketball. He's been that. And a lot of times people don't want to interfere with corporate America when you talk about endorsements. They're like, well, I'm just going to go along with the program because I don't want to hurt any other opportunities that I have out there on the basketball court to make money outside of the game of basketball. And like you said, Michael Jordan has always been, a person like that. But as he's retired and now he sees these other opportunities that he's stepping up, being in the forefront of making it happen. LeBron and who's the guy? Chris Paul and Carmelo, those guys. I mean, I think they're doing a great job because they're changing the narrative in the NBA right now. When it's just, everybody was just like, shut up and dribble. We're like, no, we're not going to shut up. We're going to be engaged. We see what's going on. We're a part of that. It's our culture. It's our landscape. And we have the voice to actually speak up. Like you were talking about that summit earlier with, people don't give Bill Russell his credit. Being in Boston. I mean, they set Bill Russell's house on fire in Boston, for him being a Black man playing in that city and being in a part of the civil rights. So we've always had guys that were iconic in the game of sport will always, set that aside. When you talk about Muhammad Ali, like those guys are my heroes. Jim Brown. The reason I went to Syracuse is because of Jim Brown.
Yeah.
But being vocal and standing up for our people, like whatever's not right, we're gonna voice our opinion about. You know what? We really don't care what you guys say.
Hey, Eddie, let me ask you this. And I have this argument with buddies of mine who sit on the couch and say, that the old adage of in football, if you get your fingers on it, you should have caught the balls. I remind them that you wouldn't have been able to get to the ball, let alone, touch the finger with it. But I think one of the things that we forget is this is not little league anymore. This is not your high school baseball, basketball, football team. Along with business, comes politics, and this is big business. Do you think that when we look at athletes, we don't see, how daunting it can be to be a pro athlete?
Yes, I mean that's so interesting you say that. For the last 5 years prior to last year, because of COVID, I was teaching a class at Ohio State, the business of professional sports, and it enlightens student athletes and also students about the business, the makeup of it, the principles behind it. It's not just the game. It's not a game that you just play for fun. It is an absolute business. And they look at the athlete as throughput in terms of you
Mhm.
are you're here for today. We're going to use you for your ability, for your talent, and then off to the next thing. And if you don't understand that as an athlete coming into this, you can get your feelings hurt. And that's where you see like the mental
Mhm.
health issues come into play. You see depression comes into play because
Yeah.
a lot of athletes, from the athlete perspective, we put all our eggs in one basket to say, all I'm going to do is play football. Dealing with the
Mhm.
student athletes I have now at Tennessee State University, everybody wants to go to the league. Everybody just says, "Yeah, I want
Right.
to go to the league." So I'm like, well, you go to the
Yeah.
league, you make millions of dollars, and you're 30 years old, 32 years old, and you retire. Now what? What is your purpose? Use this as a platform to build other business opportunities. And there's nothing wrong with having grand dreams, big dreams of playing in the NFL or the NBA, but there's so much more to the athlete. There's so much more to do, and that's not your purpose in life. It was just to dribble a basketball, put the hoop, or run for touchdowns. There's more to life uh, than just that. That's not your total calling. So when people look at athletes and they say, well, all they do is they just shut up and dribble, just run with the football. There's so much more to the business side that you have to be educated on. So therefore, when you go through this process, you go through this experience, you have an end game. I always tell my students and my student athletes, begin this journey with the end in mind. Think about when
Mhm.
you are on your deathbed, what you want your legacy to be. And it just can't be that I just won a Heisman Trophy or I was a 4-time Pro Bowler. It's how I've impacted lives, how I've changed lives,
Mhm.
how I've made
Right.
a real contribution to society.
Yeah,
Mhm.
what's great about the three of you, and we'll get into that a little later, is each one of you have been able to go beyond your expertise in sports and have been doing a lot for the community. Sheryl, before I bring the other guests in, let me ask you this as relates to, and I'd be remiss not to ask you this, and I confess, I'm going to tell the truth. When the WNBA first started, I was like most men I knew. We'd sit, we might watch, we might not. We assumed that the product wouldn't be as good as, we were used to, et cetera, et cetera. But I can say not only do I enjoy watching now, but we have seen, I think, a sea change in how people see, female athletes in team sports. We've always been able to look at them individuals with individual sports and see them as quote unquote athletic and the like. I think about tennis and obviously gymnastics with the Olympics and the like, but we're starting to see that change. When you look at that, how much of that do you think has to do with the ability of Black women in particular across society being able to stand up and say, as we like to say, we got Black girl magic working here.
Shame on you, Ed. And
I,
everybody,
I changed. I changed. I said I changed, Cheryl. I
at
changed.
least
I
you
knew
got
that was
here,
coming.
at least you admitted it, though, right?
I admit
So
it. And look, I know you could
I
cross me
gotta
over, so
forgive
I ain't gonna say nothing. Okay.
But you know what's funny? It's actually disheartening though, because that's not new to hear you say that, right? And it's not only men who have felt that way. So many times, and it's unfortunate, we as women will tear each other down instead of lifting each other up. Even when it comes to sports, right? It gets petty, it gets jealousy. Like there's so much that goes into that. But I think when you look at the league and even the NBA, I mean, we're 90% of the WNBA as Black women. And for me, I take pride, even though I don't play anymore, I take pride in the fact that, I was the first Black woman to ever sign to play in the WNBA. And in doing that, the pride I had wasn't so much as an athlete, right? Because I'm like, I know I got this. I've done this. I've been playing since I was 7 years old, so I got this. But I wanted to proudly represent for all of the Black women, all of the sisters out there who, you know, sometimes we just question, like, where do we fit? Where do we belong? Is this gonna work? I know I have so many eyes on me, and I wanted to represent for those women out there. And I want to add one more thing to that. The unfortunate part, though, is, and there are 3 men on here, so y'all feel free to correct me. What I heard was, here's why we as men don't watch the WNBA, is because the majority of the women are gay. They're lesbian. So I ain't really trying to watch that. And my response to that was, but it shouldn't really be about what their sexuality is. It should be about, can they hoop, can they play, or can they not? Because that's what I do when I watch, period. If you can play, I'm going to watch. I'm going to enjoy it. And if you can't, I got to turn the channel and go somewhere else. So it doesn't surprise me that you felt that way. But I do think the game has definitely changed, though.
All right, but before you get me in more trouble, I didn't feel that way because of their sexuality. I just had that macho feeling of, women can't play like us. But then you start to watch, and you learn and you grow. So, listen, duly noted, Sheryl.
No, but I would say most of us, though, of us grew up playing with guys, right? I know I did. I grew up playing in the streets, playing with guys, because I could never find 2 things. I could never find enough girls who were interested enough to play. And to be very honest with you, I wanted to be better. So the girls that I grew up playing with, I didn't feel like they were good enough to take me to the next level.
Yeah. Let me bring on the rest of our panel and get us all involved in this. Joining us now, Josina Anderson. She's the host of Undefined with Josina Anderson. You can find the show on Undefined with JosinaAnderson.com. And prior to that, the longtime journalist was with ESPN, where she covered the NFL and is credited with breaking a number of big stories over the years. Journalist Kevin Blackstone is frequently seen on ESPN. He's also a professor for the Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. Michele Meyer-Shipp. Michele was recently named Chief People and Cultural Officer for Major League Baseball. She's had a long career in diversity and inclusion, working for a number of top corporations over the years. And finally, Carrie Davis. Carrie is the athletic director at Howard University. Prior to coming to Howard, Davis helped oversee the boxing division at HBO for many years. I welcome you all. Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate it. Kevin, let me start with you and ask you this. You've been covering sports for a long time, and of late, you've written some very provocative and I think spot on columns about where we sit today socially and where sports plays a role. With what you've heard from our former All-Stars there, what's your thinking about where we sit and the role that athletes and sports play in moving our country to the betterment for, quite frankly, people of color?
Thanks for having me on, Ed, and to say hello to everybody there who I don't know personally, but a lot of people there, just about everybody I've covered at some point in their careers, college and professional. But sports plays a really important piece in the narrative of Black people in this country. And so I think about the fact that I always point this out to one of my classes, that the first time Black people, African people, enslaved Africans showed up in the media in this country was
as property to be sold. The second time they showed up was as athletes, as unnamed jockeys racing horses. And they would be written about and referred to as slave boys. And I think about that history because the history of the Black athlete, all the way back to him as a jockey, as an unnamed slave boy, became important to us as Black people and as a progeny of enslaved Africans, because just like today, then your success as a jockey provided you the means to purchase your own freedom, and to have a voice. And so you fast forward to today, and I think one of the reasons that we pay so much attention to what athletes have to say on a platform is because that's something that we have been accustomed to, and because sadly, that's something that we pay attention to and the greater society pays attention to. And I'll just remind you of this. I think it was back in 2014 when Black students at the University of Missouri were protesting against slights that they felt that they were incurring on the campus in Columbia, Missouri. Nobody paid attention. A Black graduate student went on a hunger strike to bring attention to their concerns. Not too many people paid attention. They recruited the football team. The football team, mostly Black, came out and said, we're down for this struggle, and unless some changes are made and our people are heard, we're not going to play football next weekend. All of a sudden, it became a national story. The chancellor and the president had to make some moves, got moved out of office, and changes were brought to the Missouri campus in Columbia. And so I think that's the legacy of the importance of sports to Black people and for Black people in this country.
Josina, let me bring you in on that and ask you, I think back, there's always been the ability as an athlete, particularly when you were a stellar athlete, to kind of do as you would because of your prowess. Owners and the like wanted to keep you happy. Didn't mean it was going to keep your people happy, but keep you happy. I think all the way back to somebody like Jack Johnson, who, it was a brother that didn't care. He was going to do what he wanted to do because he was the baddest man on the planet. With you, if you look around and you see where we sit today, we are starting to see, particularly this generation of athlete, understand the power that comes with being that athlete, though not fully realized yet. What do you think the future holds for, what we're beginning to see?
Well, I can talk about my generation in terms of, the sports that I covered. And I want to say thank you, Ed, for having me on and obviously joining this esteemed panel. But I mean, I think back to, the Michael Jordan days and how, he kind of set the stage with, his burgeoning career and where he kind of took that even with the business side. And then I see now where the contracts are going, even in the NBA, and guys like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and all these NBA stars really seeing their salaries rocket, and in turn their power, because those contracts exceed the amount that the coaches are even making. And so you see their voice kind of rising and like with that. And then when you go over to the NFL, and I almost kind of put it like pre-Kaepernick and post-Kaepernick. I feel like, as the Kaepernick thing was happening, you had, guys that were showing a little bit more of a desire to speak out, but at the same time incurring, some backlash from society and some, backlash from, the fans, and then even with some of their marketing endorsements and kind of weighing that. But then even now, post George Floyd, you're seeing even more comfort with speaking out. And I think that represents an evolution when you're looking at it from Michael Jordan's days, where I remember, I think he made a comment, Kevin Blackistone, you can add into this, where he was like, all people of all colors, basically buy shoes. And so he wants to be very cognizant of the comments that he makes, all the way now to where you have it where LeBron and those guys are being very vocal. And I think even with that, I see a distinction between NBA athletes and NFL athletes, because the NBA athletes, you see more of their stars at the upper echelon of that league, having more comfort in speaking out. Whereas with, the NFL, more of the upper echelon athletes are obviously the quarterbacks, which tend to be more white, and that you see a little bit more of a reticence to participate. But all in all, I do see a progression in that from where we were. I'm going back to my first days in covering, sports when Michael Jordan was, playing, with the Wizards, all the way now to guys showing more and more comfort speaking out post Kaepernick, post George Floyd, and also where their relative contracts are kind of parallel with that as well.
Before I bring Kery and Michele in, let me just piggyback off of what you just said there. DC, let me go to you very quickly, and then I'm going to go to Eddie on the Kaepernick question. But DC, the sheer amount of money that's being made, I think Josina hit it on the head. The money that's being given to the superstars, particularly in the NBA, is transformative generationally. And these guys are understanding the power. So you're seeing them get into other businesses and bringing that power. Give me a sense, because I know you talk to these guys all the time, of how they're looking at this.
Well, yeah, you understand. I started that. I was the first 100 billion, guy in New Jersey. So again, Chuck Daly, one of my coaches at the time, he said, Derrick, it's never how much you're worth, it's how much you can negotiate. But with those type of responsibilities, you do become that voice that people need to hear. It's not just a situation where, the numbers are astronomical, but okay, I still got to stand up and talk about what is right and what is wrong and what's going on. It was so funny to me, like I can hear Charles Barkley say something, right? And I can come and say the same thing and I get criticized by it. But, I got tough skin, so I never cared about that. If it was wrong, I would tell you that it was wrong, and then let's figure out how we're going to fix it.
Michele, I know, let me bring you in, that you have had an opportunity. You're relatively new to the position, but I know you've had an opportunity to talk with a number of the players. I think about somebody like Mookie Betts, who has decided, at times to come out and say, look, I need to do this or I need to do that because of what was going on surrounding the nation. Give me a sense of what you've been hearing from the Major League Baseball players.
Yeah, I have to tell you, first of all, thank you for having me here, and I'm honored to be on this panel with all of you. So, I joined baseball just about a year ago when, we were in the heat of the social justice movement, the aftermath of George Floyd, et cetera. And what attracted me to baseball was watching how our Black players and other players as well were starting to speak up on social justice issues in a way that they never have before. And what I've watched happen over the last year is the growth and emergence and the birth, if you will, of the Players Alliance. And the Players Alliance is our professional baseball group of predominantly Black athletes who have come together purposely to decide on when and how they want to use their voices. Speaking to everything everyone said here, I think there's been a recognition that their voices are heard, people want to hear what they have to say, and they have the power to make a difference. So through the Players Alliance, they've come together and started to speak up in a way that they never have before. White players have joined in, and other players, as allies. And I'm watching them use their footprint and their platform, not just on social media, but in efforts across the nation. So it's been pretty fascinating to watch. And I've actually been really impressed to watch several of our owners, support them, get engaged with them, and engage them in conversations to drive dialogue across difference. So I think we're definitely headed in the right direction. And like everyone's alluded to, I think our athletes are starting to really recognize the power behind their voices.
Let me take that and shift. Eddie, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Kery, let me bring you into this. I should note that I could, at least half of you, I'm personal friends with. So Kery and I, we raised our kids together and the like. So with all transparency, we've been hanging out and having sports conversations for many, many, many years. And to that end, Kery, with your position now as the athletic director at Howard University, you know, when you think about the idea of empowering one of the things that you and I talked about before you even thought about being an AD anywhere was the idea that if we could convince Black kids who, particularly in basketball, who were like the Fab Five at Michigan, to take an HBCU, you know, and really empower that school, that would be something. We're starting to see that trickle down, not only from the professional athlete understanding his power, but the idea that, you know, HBCUs with Eddie now coaching and, you know, Deion Sanders, you being able to bring in people that you've, you know, done a tremendous job at Howard. We're starting to see that we do have the power and ability to sway things, do we not?
First of all, it's been many, many years since, especially since all of our kids are now out of college. So that's how long we've been. But thank you for having me, Eddie. And you're right. We have seen a shift recently in the positioning of HBCUs. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I was attracted to the position at Howard. I remember my very first conversation speaking with the president of Howard during the interview process, and he said to me, "Why can't Howard be Stanford? Why can't Howard be Notre Dame? Why can't Howard be Georgetown? One of those universities who have high academic standards but use athletics to enhance the brand of their athletic standing." And that's what I signed on to do. I signed on to not look to just compete as a mid-major. I'm signing on to bring our sports to the highest level possible. I read an article written by Jimmy King about 3 years ago. He wrote an article online, and you can Google it, and talked about what if the Fab Five had gone to Howard instead of Michigan. The buildings that we built at Michigan, what if we built them at Howard? Right? What a difference! What a difference that might have made historically. And that's sort of the premise that we're marking on right now. Last year, we made a lot of people notice that we signed the first 5-star recruit to sign basketball at an HBCU, young man named McCord Maker. We had 2 volleyball players sign with us this year who are top 20 players in the country. And when we ask why are they choosing an HBCU, they're saying my talent can be found anywhere, but my voice can be heard most while I'm here. And that's what we're looking to empower our young people to be themselves. I'll give you one other example that I think is a good one. A young lady we signed to play soccer had committed to North Carolina, which is one of the top soccer schools in the country. She online she talked about social justice issues, and her coach called her and told her to bring down her texts, right, or bring down her tweets. And she immediately decommitted from the school and called us, right? And he said, "Yes, you can tweet whatever you want," but absolutely, absolutely. But we are. I think HBCUs, and Eddie, I know you're feeling this as well. It allows our young people to not only be themselves, right, but see the excellence not just amongst athletes, right? The person next to them, the person in the dorm room next to them, is going to be a great actor or a great musician or a great, or engineer or a doctor. That's what we're selling, right? And all of those people look like us.
Eddie, let me ask you this. I was backtrack to what Josina brought up, and that's Colin Kaepernick. How much do you believe that was the impetus for a lot of this to really happen? You know, there was that sense when he first started of who's going to be on the side, who's going to kneel with him, who's going to, you know, stand beside him and the like. And clearly he made a decision that perhaps, you know, as he has alluded to, that he didn't maybe think fully outright, but he made a decision that essentially ended his career at the end of the day. But one will say, much like we talked about before we got on air, what Ali was able to do in giving us, some of his prime years. How much of that do you believe was the impetus of what we're seeing? And give me your idea and experience of going to an HBCU, coach.
Well, I think it is definitely that was the tipping point with Colin Kaepernick. Um, Prior to that, athletes did speak out, but just that gesture in terms of taking a knee during the national anthem, not once but a few times, and you know, it brought a light to why he was doing it. And he explained what he was doing. For some reason it got hijacked and it turned into something completely different. But we are here today having this conversation because of that gesture. Whether you agree with it or not. My father, my grandfather, my uncles, we've all served. They served in the U.S. military. I went to a military school, and I understand what it means for both sides. But what he was representing and what he was talking about is the other people that fall under that flag, are communities that are underserved, that are ignored, the social injustices that do happen, bringing that to light. We all fall under the thread of that same flag, and that's what he was talking about. And I'm glad that he was able to, I guess, sacrifice his career so we can have an open dialogue. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, no question. Now that I've been under the hood at this HBCU at Tennessee State, and looking at how business has been done over the last what, 50, 100 years since the school existed, um, it's an underappreciated asset in our community. It's been ignored, um, not appreciated, and it's a shame because I see the bones of greatness are there. The potential is there, not just on the field but off the field, of what this university can truly do. They've produced so many great people, Oprah Winfrey, some young entrepreneurs that Slim and Husk that have just built a pizza franchise, just to name a couple. And that needs to be highlighted. And I believe that through this opportunity, all boats rise. You look at any institution around the country, the eyes and the front porch of any institution is through the football program. And I believe, by being successful there, all boats rise. We're able to show and elevate the other colleges, the other institutions, the other students, the other important factors that make up this great university. And without Colin Kaepernick doing what he did, we wouldn't be having this type of conversation. It wouldn't be on the tip of everybody's tongue, and it would have been an afterthought had he not uh, did what he did in terms of taking a knee and really having it go like wildfire throughout the country, and everybody's talking about the conversation in their households.
Sheryl, has as someone, one of the few women until recently, who had her own shoe and dealt with Nike and, understand the business of this. How much do we have to start to understand, as I mentioned before, that this is, high stakes for a professional athlete? And if decisions like Kaepernick, made are to be made and to further be made, these people are going to have to, I think, get more backing from our community than Colin Kaepernick did. I mean, it's easy to kind of tweet and buy a T-shirt, but to really say, hey, we're behind you and we're willing to say to the 49ers at that point, we're not going to buy a ticket if you treat people this way or the like. Where do you see the community in terms of trying to assist the Black athlete in bringing some of this power to bear?
Well, it's funny to me how it's easy for us to sit back, right, and watch and say, well, why isn't she doing more? Why isn't he doing more? Why don't they speak up? Why don't they protest? Why don't they not play? Um, but a lot of us are just sitting at home, right? And as you said, it's easy to pick up the phone and tweet and say, I support Cap, or, what they did to George Floyd's wrong. But why are the men playing? Why are the women playing? When I look at it and say, but what are you doing? Like, what am I doing instead of just sitting at home and watching everything and not having any action? I will say this regarding the WNBA from the inception of the league. I think we, the women of the WNBA, have always spoke up. We've always stood out when we saw something that wasn't right. We weren't afraid to speak out. And when I look at the whole situation with George Floyd and what the women in the WNBA did this year and playing in the bubble, yeah, you had some who said, I am more focused on social justice and I am not going to play this season. And the women don't make the type of money that the men make. So when you talk about, salaries, like the women I felt had a lot, they sacrificed a lot. Not to say that the men didn't, but when you look at the salaries and you have women who are making, $100,000 who said, I'm not playing this year because I am going to stand behind what I'm saying and I'm going to put some action behind it. I mean, $100,000 is nothing, but you have the league saying, well, if you don't play, you're not going to get paid. And the one thing I will say is being a Nike athlete, which is / Converse, Converse stepped up and stood behind one of the athletes and said, if you choose not to play and you're not going to get your WNBA salary, Converse, we will pay you your salary in addition to what her agreement was with Converse. But I just think as a community, as a Black community, I do think we can always do more. We can always be better. And when we see things that, our athletes are doing and they're trying to make a difference and they're using their voice, regardless of, how many times everybody's going to have something bad to say. But I think if we would also, as a community, just speak up and use our voice and show them how much we're behind them and how much we support them, I think you may find that more athletes would stand up and would speak out when things aren't right.
Let me do this. We're going to, I'm going to come to Kevin and Josina on this, but Kery, I want to start with you because you're on the NCAA Oversight Committee, and we have seen two rulings, quite frankly, of late that really are going to change the landscape and I think are opening the door to real change. The first is the NCAA versus Alston, and that really gets into antitrust and the Sherman Act and some other things, free trade and the like. But the one that most people are focused on is the idea of the college athlete being able now to profit from their image, which heretofore had been a complaint where you have $1 billion industry with college sports and these athletes, not being able to garner any, monetary gain from the jersey sales of their likeness and the like. When you're looking at this, Kery, what are you seeing and what do you expect?
Well, just today, the NCAA Board of Governors approved an interim NIL program, which basically allows all of the universities to, in effect, to allow their students to profit off their name, image, and likeness, and that's terrific. It's a little bit messy because of the fact that it's not uniform. The NCAA was probably 5 to 10 years late on this issue. They did not see the sea of change that was coming. And so therefore, a number of states stepped in and enacted name, image, and likeness laws, which go into effect tomorrow. So the NCAA had to do something in order to keep the playing field even. So that's why you got this interim process today. But it's messy, and there are actually almost no rules to it. There's only two that they've stated, which is one, that you can't have pay for play, which means that you can't have someone scores 20 touchdowns. You can't say, okay, for the 20th touchdown, I'll give you $100,000. You can't do that, nor can any payments be related to recruiting. But other than that, there are no other rules. I think what has to happen is probably, and I don't often say this, but probably the federal government needs to step in. They need to step in and almost protect everyone from themselves, because we have 50 different state laws out there governing these issues. You're going to really have a serious mess. But from the student athlete's perspective, I think this is about time. Um, I think the student athletes should. It's again, it was almost insane to have a student living in one room who's an athletic student, and then the person next to him who's a musician who can go out and play in a gig and make money, and that student can't off their own image. That to me never made any sense. So I think that that's at least a step forward, but we're nowhere near where we should to be in terms of uh, the guardrails that have to be put in place to make sure that the playing field stays even.
Kevin, let me ask you, and Josina, I'll start with you, Kevin. The idea that this is also a stone's throw away from what a lot of African Americans see as this plantation mentality that not only college sports has had, but professional sports has had. So, how do you see that in the marriage there, and what you're thinking of the new rulings?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just throw some support behind what Sheryl Swoopes just said, because much of this is a media problem. It's what we choose to cover and what we choose to ignore. And in the months before Colin Kaepernick sat and dropped to a knee, the sisters with the Minnesota Lynx were standing up to protest the extrajudicial killing of Philando Castile. And women have been in the forefront of movements on the field of sports and in the arenas for a long time. Whether you talk about Tony Smith Thompson, who as a basketball player at Manhattanville College in the early 2000s turned her back on the flag to protest brutality against Black people. Whether you go all the way back to Rose Robinson in the late 1950s, an outstanding gold medal field athlete who refused to partake in the Pan Am Games for this country because she knew she was being used to cover up for the ills of the society against progeny of Black people. So sisters have been in the forefront of this movement for a long time, and they have not concerned themselves about what little income or how much income or what sponsorships they might lose if they put their neck out. As far as the NCAA, it's still a sham. What's going on right now, when we step back and look at this, this is really a Black male issue. This is a racial justice issue. Derrick Coleman, Eddie George generated millions of dollars for the institutions for which they played. And Black men like them who played football and played basketball at the highest level in college have turned this college sports industry into a multi-billion-dollar industry. I knew Carrie Davis when he was in boxing. Everybody in boxing earned something from the money that was generated. The problem with college athletics is the people we go to watch and pay to watch in college sports, predominantly Black males, football and basketball players, are still not sharing in the wealth that they generate for everybody else. They've turned white men who are running NCAA, who are conference commissioners, who are coaches, who now also coach women's basketball, because women's basketball has become a moneymaker in some places, have turned them into millionaires. And so all NIL does, name, image, and likeness, is give you an opportunity to have a side hustle. You want to make some money? Okay.
Yes.
You go ahead and you make your own T-shirt. You put on your own logo, and you sell as many as you can, and we'd be cool with that. But guess what? You're still not sticking your hand in my purse. You're not getting the money out of my pocket. You know what's really, really kind of interesting about what's happened in the last couple of days? The first two stories that I've seen about college athletes taking immediate advantage of NIL, they're both white. A white basketball player and a white quarterback. So until you blow this system up, this isn't something for the government to do. I mean, this is just, it's just, there's no way that any of us could not make money running NCAA if you don't have to pay your laborers, if you don't have to give them workers' comp. I'm sure Eddie George got some injuries playing at Ohio State that might linger with him today. Fortunately, the NFL may be paying for him, but college is not paying for him.
You're right.
And they certainly should. So this is, to me, this is just a trick bag right now. And until you break down the economic system of college sports and bring equity into it for the laborers who make it go, then this is you're just whistling in the wind right
Josina, hang on
No,
just a
Eddie,
second. I'll come to you and
Eddie,
ask you about that.
can
Go
I
ahead.
jump in for one quick? So I just wanted to respond
Yeah.
to one of the things Kevin said. And I agree with you that the difference between universities paying for students and NIL is they're apples and oranges, right? However, one of the things I do think we have to consider is there needs to be tiers, because every school is not Alabama, every school is not is not Oklahoma, every school is not Kentucky, right? And so what ends up happening is you need to have a system in place that, okay, yes, at Kentucky and Alabama and those schools, there should be some resources allowed for those student athletes. I 100% agree with that. But at the same time, for the smaller schools, right, who are not operating at profits, right? As a matter of fact, almost 90% of academic institutions, athletic programs do not operate at a profit, right? So we should make sure that we don't put everyone into the same category when we say, okay, there is a plantation mentality going on, because in most instances, there's not.
I don't know that I would agree, Kery, with the idea of plantation mentality. I'm going to bring that to Josina in just a moment. I think that's across the board, not only in sports. I think there's a plantation mentality in America, and if you don't own it, you ain't running it. You still out in the field. But Michele, let me ask you to take your Major League Baseball hat on and put your sports mom hat on, and tell us about what your son is currently doing.
Yeah, it's actually really funny that we're having this conversation right now, because my third and youngest son just graduated from high school, and he's headed off to Yale to play football. And the minute that NCAA decision came out about this NIL thing, this brother is upstairs right now making his logo. And he's talking to his older brother about, okay, how can I take advantage of this opportunity to build my brand and my business and my likeness? Because his view and the view of his teammates is, we've busted our butts, we've worked like dogs to get here. This is a nonstop sport. We're nonstop training, blood, sweat, and tears. And what can we get out of this for us beyond being on that field, being the workhorse for these coaches? So it's going to be interesting to see what comes of this. I know that the young men he's talking to that are going with him to school, they're all really excited about it, and hopefully they can find a way to make this work. And I think to Kerry's point and Kevin's point, I think we just need to make sure the right guardrails are put in place around it. But at this point, as a football sports mommy, I'm going to make sure I help him in any way that I can do his thing to kind of get his business off the ground.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Derrick, talked about it earlier, and Josina, I'm coming right to you. But the idea of sports not being sports for the sheer love of it anymore, the generation, the world we live in, is for most people about branding yourself. And I think, a lot of these athletes are going to end up, and I'm not saying that, it's going to take away from much of their time, but, some of that time they spent on learning the craft of that sport is going to be taken up by branding themselves in that sport. Josina, let me ask you about that whole sense of plantation mentality. I mean, that's been a strange dance for African-American athletes for a long time, particularly in pro sports. I know you've had conversations with many a Black athlete about this. Where do you sit on that?
Well, it's interesting because, Kevin had made a comment about the media and our impact in this in terms of the, stories that we choose to cover and highlight. But when you talk, Ed, about the plan mentality, the thing that I wanted to also point out was the onus that's on the athletes, to display courage and, maybe withholding, their services to also display that impact, and not necessarily just doing it through the off season when the games don't count, but also doing it when the games count. I know I covered both labor negotiations, for the NFL when the labor agreement had expired, and in both issues, and both when Gene Upshaw was alive and Tagliabue was a commissioner of the NFL. And then, this most recent deal that just got done this past season. And in both instances, the athletes didn't hold the line, going into the season, breaking right before. And I know part of that is the pay disparity that is between the top athletes, in the league, from the quarterbacks, all the ones making minimum wage. And, those athletes at the lower tier not having the same wherewithal to be able to hold out missing income. But still, in order to, display, at least I feel, display, your full impact in terms of your services, sometimes you have to have the courage in withholding them. I mean, you look at, athletes like Muhammad Ali, who had the, courage to, be out of boxing, for a while for, what he was trying to, stand up for, and some of these athletes, not being able to hold that. So I just wanted to say I put some of that onus on the athletes as well. And then going back to, the conversation that we were having before, I think that the recent decision that came out does fall short in terms of, one, yes, you get the enhanced educational benefits. And then you were talking yesterday, Kery, with the NIL. But when you look at the total pot that is generated by the NCAA and, the business of that being $1 billion business, it's like, but what aspect of what I generate as an athlete, is a part of that. And I do believe that they should be able to, fully benefit in that, and just being able to do it, like you were saying, Kevin, as a side hustle is definitely not enough. But I do think it's ironic that Brett Kavanaugh, one of the justices who was speaking up on the on the decision that recently came out, was one of the ones that was highlighting, in what other industries, are the laborers able to, are the industries able to keep the money away from the labor when the business is legitimate, and kind of signaling where, this should be going also in the future as far as, getting salary benefits and not just educational scholastic benefits, or being able to just make money off of your image on the side.
Yeah. Let me do this, as we are only about 5 minutes left. I'm going to come to each one of you and ask you for a closing thought, that's kind of in your bailiwick, in your wheelhouse. Josina, let me start with you and come back to what Kevin raised, and that is the question of the media and the important role that the media plays in, making sure that the honest story is being told with the social aspect of sports. That isn't always as easy as people would lead to believe, because if, unlike yourself now, you own the property that you are, utilizing, when you're with an ESPN and NBC and ABC, you don't own it, and you do have people to answer to and the like. What's your expectation as we move forward with the media's role in all of this?
Well, it's interesting because I think, post George Floyd, I feel like we're seeing a little bit more of a greater comfort with it, right? And there is, especially when the Colin Kaepernick thing was, first happening, there was still apprehensions either with journalists speaking up from it. And even though it wasn't necessarily some directive from the networks, you could tell, an apprehension about, to what degree do you go to and talking about it on the air. And I feel like after George Floyd, because I feel like almost after Barack Obama was the president, and, we were getting in this country of feeling like everything was post-racial, there's some segment of the, society not really believing certain things were happening to Black and brown people. And I think what the George Floyd incident did was, if you can see what Derrick Chauvin did to George Floyd in broad daylight, or, the Caucasian lady that was in Central Park, be able to shrill her voice while she's being recorded, and the guy's not even near her. It's like, yes, these things do happen. And even sometimes from liberal people or card-carrying Democrats, who can still, adjust themselves in certain ways that impact, Black people. And I do think it's important now that we, like going back to what Sheryl was saying, move from just being performative and also impactful in terms of how we, as in the media or people just in general, when you're saying, looking at people, what can we do? It's not just about putting a blackout sign on Instagram, but, what are we doing to also be impactful and performative? I think that, whether you're independent journalists or you belong to a big network, realizing what your responsibility is and having that stature and having that role and not being fearful, and then having that domino effect on each other to lift each other up, not only in writing it, but supporting it if our voices get kind of beaten back in that process as well, at all levels of journalism too.
Yeah, Kevin, let me ask you the infamous comment from Laura Ingraham of the Shut Up and Dribble piece. One of the interesting things that I have found, though, as Josina alluded to, the idea that we were seeing, particularly, right out of the George Floyd murder, was the idea that there was a want to talk about it. I have heard, even from some African Americans, that enough of this on the sports side. I tune into X sports program to get sports. If I want to get, political wrangling, I'll tune into CNN or Fox or MSNBC. Where do you see the future of that, delineation between, talking about what's more important and simply talking about what, the network is supposed to talk about and concentrate on, that is sports?
Well, that whole idea that sports and important other issues in life are separate is built on a fallacy. I mean, we're about to watch the Olympics. The marathon is probably the most famous Olympic event. The marathon was born out of politics. The guy who ran the marathon ran it to make an announcement about a war effort. It was political. And we know that the Olympics are extremely political. It's nationalistic. It's jingoistic. It's everything. So that's absolutely incorrect. But what's pernicious about the idea goes back to what I was saying earlier, and that's that for whatever reasons, and I think we know what they are. Black people are more often paid attention to in the realm of entertainment. Derrick was talking about when we begin this dialogue, and sports is entertainment. I told you about Black people being able to purchase their freedom if they were successful enough as enslaved people riding horses. And then of course there's the Jackie Robinson story that you mentioned, which is a part of Americana. That Jackie Robinson was a militant Black man who was court-martialed unsuccessfully in the Army when he refused, as was his right, to give up his seat on what a white officer, thought was a segregated bus. It is overlooked that in his first book, he actually wrote that he could no longer stand for the national anthem. So, we in the media have cherry-picked what we want to present to the public and ignored what we don't want to present to the public. But those days are over. And really, I would say that, and this is what I was getting to about the media, I think that there have always been well thought out Black folks in athletics like those that are on this show. But so often, the reporters covering them were not interested in their intellectual thoughts, their political thoughts about the world around them. I think about Fleetwood Walker, who was really the first Major League Baseball player who was descendant of Africans in 1884 and got run out of the game with his brother Weldy by 1889. In 1908, he wrote a book called Our Home Colony. And it was a book that eviscerated America and called on the progeny of enslaved Africans in this country to repatriate to Africa. And this is before Marcus Garvey, right? So athletes have always had these ideas, but it wasn't until they had people that look like Josina, people who look like me, working in media, who were interested in what they thought about things around them other than just the final score of the game that they just played. And so I think that's one of the biggest changes that we've had in the last few years.
Michele, let me ask you, in terms of the politics of and big business of sport, there's no way around it. What you do, we're starting to see, sports understand that you're not going to be able to just sweep this under the rug. You're going to have to deal with some of these outside entities that make their way in. What's the balance in making sure that you are able to associate the idea of being fair to
Yep.
the game, yet being principled to what's going on outside of the game.
Yeah, that's a good one, Ed. I mean, I think a couple of things. I mean, one is we have to be strategic, and I say this both to the business leaders, and I say it also to the players. So, in thinking about all that we're trying to accomplish, I think the first thing is an acknowledgement that we have to have the candid and uncomfortable conversations. Going back to some of the things folks have shared here today, right? We have to have the conversations with each other about what's happening. We have to be real and candid, and then we have to be strategic. So it's not just enough to speak the words, if you will, whether those words are coming from a player or from a league. There has to be action behind the words, and there has to be a strategy to the words. And what I try to encourage our organization and our players to do is to align everything that they're doing and saying and all of the commitments that they make back to our core values and who we say we are, right? If we say we are a sport that wants to attract all and be inclusive to all, well, you know what? What are we going to do beyond words to show that commitment, to live that commitment? And we have a lot of work to do in our sport, clearly. So that's the angle that we're putting on it now. And that's the focus that our Players Alliance, for example, is rallying around as they think about the issues that they want to tackle and get their arms around. So it's a fine balance, but you've got to have the conversation. You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable with the realities of the situation, like so many folks have articulated tonight. And then you have to be strategic with a plan that you can rally around.
Kery, give me a sense of how you see the future of HBCUs in relation to athletics, and what you hope a decade from now.
I think the future for HBCUs is incredibly bright. As we talked about earlier, I think right now young people are looking at HBCUs as a place where they can go with can be themselves. They can articulate their beliefs and stand up. We had this past summer, a lot of our students were very heavily involved in terms of protesting and in making their voices heard. I think that that's going to continue. But I also think from an athletic standpoint, we're going to see more and more people being attracted to working at HBCUs. I think Eddie George is a great example. Quite frankly, I remember reading that and being excited that a talent such as him was now at an HBCU. Deion Sanders, Larry Scott at the institution. I think that there is a movement not just of student athletes, but of coaches, administrators, looking to, in effect, be involved in a place where they can help grow and help build their own legacies.
And I think what we're going to have to start to see is all of us lending a hand, and more importantly, our dollars to HBCUs to bring them, where they deservedly so should be. I think about someone like a Chris Paul or a Steph Curry, who's been in association and brought a golf program to Howard University, and neither one of them went to HBCUs, but they know the importance. Derrick, let me come to you and ask you about the responsibility of the athlete and what you'd like to see.
Well, the responsibility of the athletes is keep using your platform to enrich the lives of others. Listening to Kery talking about how you also forget Kery, Kenny Anderson, who played with me in Jersey, is at Fisk,
Right.
University. So we were talking about that earlier. Me and Eddie. I was applauding him just for that effort to be at a HBCU because with all the things that I do in Detroit in the summertime, I have 60 teams in my summer league right now. I have 50 boys team and a 10 girls team, creating a platform as well. But for me, it's okay, how do we take what Eddie is doing, what Kery is doing, what Kenny is doing, what Deion is doing, and put these clinics and camps on with HBCUs in Detroit to create opportunities for these kids to get a chance to go to university. I mean, I just use basketball as a carrot, to get the kids' attention, but I try to expose them to everything else that's going on. We have to still create wraparound services for our kids, and it takes a village, and no matter what we do in life, it takes all of us. I mean, the conversations that we're having on the phone right now, we need to keep having these conversations and come up with solutions to better the youth that's coming up behind us.
Sheryl, let me come to you and end with what I started with, and that's the idea of women's role in sports now. And we're, starting to see the idea of it finding its equal playing field. I'll ask you, as I asked Kery, a decade from now, what would you like to see by means of, women's team sports and where we sit?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. Gosh, to be very honest with you, I would love to see more women in not necessarily leadership positions, but in ownership positions where we are controlling the room. We're able to make the big decisions. We're able to go out and uplift other women and give other women opportunity. When I look at women in the WNBA, and we play 3 months out of the year in the WNBA, and then players are playing overseas. If they're not playing overseas, they have other jobs just to supplement their income, and it's been going on forever. And when I look at one great example of a female who came from the WNBA, a Black female, that would be Swin Cash, who is the VP of basketball ops for the Pelicans. When I look at what Swin's doing on the NBA side, I go back and I question, why can't that happen on the WNBA side? I don't feel like we as women, as Black women, are given those opportunities in the WNBA, but the NBA honestly can see where we belong, where we're beneficial. And so when I think about it, I would just really love to see more of us in ownership positions, or at least in higher positions where we can make a difference.
And Eddie, let me have you close out in the idea of ownership. Sheryl just brought that up, and we should note that you are a graduate of the Kellogg School of Management from Northwestern University. So the idea of business and understanding that at the end of the day, it really is about owning. How optimistic are you that we will start to see not minority ownership, not a percent, 0.5%, 4%, 2%, but true ownership by people of color in the next few years?
No, you're absolutely correct. In saying that, for me, it's always been about having ownership. That's why after I played the game of football, I went back, got my master's in business, because I really wanted to understand all the components of business, from finance to marketing to entrepreneurship to law to all of it, so I can be in a position of power. And here at Tennessee State University, our four pillars are going to build this program through tradition, education, entrepreneurship, and performance. And entrepreneurship is the mindset that I'm not going to put myself in a box. I'm going to eliminate the box in terms of how I'm going to think, how I'm going to operate, how I'm going to do things.
That's right.
And we go back to the name, image, and likeness. This is a wonderful opportunity to teach our kids about business. Now they can have a chance to go out and make money. Now you have to form an LLC. Now you have to pay taxes. Now you have to figure out, if I have a surplus of money, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to go buy the latest Jordans? Am I going to put it towards uh, 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 an insurance product, or an annuity for my future, or a 529 plan for my newborn kid, along those lines? So I'm very optimistic about what's going to happen here in the future for our community, for our athletes. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think this is a start of it. We continue to push for policy change. We continue to push for law change. We continue to push for equal playing ground when it comes to the political realm. And it's certainly a lot of work there needs to be done. But I am certainly optimistic about what's happening, because we are more aware of what's happening. Our student athletes know that, hey, they're not being compensated fairly. They understand the nature of the business, and they're becoming more educated about that. No longer are we in the dark in terms of what the numbers look like and where we stand. I think that's a part of it now. The question is, how can we put action behind it and real change, where we see not just getting a percentage here or 4% there, but more or less building generational wealth, and we're in a position of power. And all starts with our education, our network, and the ability to think outside the box.
I certainly hope that this has spurred, people to think, and we'll see further conversation about this. DC, Sheryl, Eddie, Josina, Kevin, Michele, and Kery, I thank you all for joining us. It was a great discussion.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Take
Enjoy
care,
it.
everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
All
guys.
the
Take
best.
care.
Now, back to you.